Yo, what's good, guys? The video here. Today we got European freedom that is illegal in the US of A. So, without further ado, let's watch it. Let's see what they have to say, because this should be interesting.
Oh, give me a home where the buffalo roam, where the deer
The river. So we got the mountains. It's feeling like the start to a movie. What is going on here?
That allows anyone to
Should it be?
In many countries in Europe, there exists a fundamental right to roam, an ancient custom that allows anyone to wander an open countryside, whether the land is privately or publicly owned. In fact, Sweden is so proud of the fact that its natural lands are accessible to everyone that the Swedish Tourism Board famously listed the entire country on Airbnb in 2017.
That's funny. I'm not gonna lie though. I don't know personally. Now this is me, right? Obviously, I've grown up in a very different environment where, you know, you're not allowed to roam anywhere, and it's like, I don't know, like, because I have a goal to get a bunch of land just so I don't gotta deal with people. And it's like, I want the right to, like, tell people, stay the hell off my property. Like, what's the point of even buying a big plot of space to, like, get privacy if people are just allowed to show up anyway?
Gorgeous photos of riverbanks, forest glens, and rocky beaches.
Also, here's a question, right? Now, this comes from the logical side of me. I have guard dogs, personally. So, let's say I was in Sweden, right? Let's say somebody goes on my property and they meet my Rottweiler, and my Rottweiler doesn't want them on my property. Here where I live, they shouldn't have been on my property, so they get what they get, and there's really nothing that would come from that. What would happen in Sweden? Would I get fined because my dog attacked somebody on my property? How would that go? Just
is beckoning users to experience the countryside. And it's all completely free of charge, thanks to a freedom granted by the Constitution of Sweden called Allemansrätten, or every man's right. But coming from the United States, where
also before she gets into that, let me say I do see the flip side of that, right? I do see the beauty and everybody getting to explore the country. Like, I understand how in some ways that can be good too. So this isn't necessarily me saying it's a bad thing. It's just saying I wouldn't like that, because I wouldn't want people showing up to where I live at and me not having the right to tell them to get the hell out of there.
there are no trespassing signs, fences, and boundaries that effectively say this land is my land, not your land.
Exactly.
Well, the concept in Europe seems a little bit outlandish, to say the least.
Okay, and she also raised me another question. What happens, like, are you allowed to fence off your land and, like, lock your gates? Or, like, are you allowed to open gates? Like, how does this work? Where is the line, right? Because I'm gonna assume that you're not allowed to just walk into people's houses, right? So, like, where does the line fall?
So why do Europeans see access to nature as a basic human right, but Americans view the wild frontier as largely off limits? Where do property rights end and human rights begin? Well, let's take a look.
And the skies are not cloudy all day.
The right to roam, also known as the freedom to roam, is an ancient custom that allows anyone to wander in the open countryside, whether the land is privately or publicly owned. In countries such as Norway, Sweden, Estonia, and Scotland, It has existed as a common right, a defining concept of nationhood, and has only recently been codified into law. Although the names and specifics vary by country, the concept is relatively the same. The general public is granted non-motorized access to certain public or private lands for responsible recreational use. One may travel through by foot, ski, horse, bike, or boat, as well as forage and sometimes even fish on uncultivated lands without the landowner's explicit permission. Camping for 1 or 2 nights is permissible even in some countries, provided the user does not camp within close proximity of the landowner's home or in their gardens or on agricultural areas. Although, fair warning, economic pursuits like fishing, hunting, or foraging for goods that you plan on selling, as well as activities that could harm the land, like lighting fires, are generally not allowed, although there might be some exceptions from one country to another. And
Okay, so they say you're allowed to forage, but you're not allowed to sell what you forage. How is that even enforceable? Like, how can you prove that? I don't even see how that's enforceable.
those who roam may not disturb or damage wildlife or crops, refrain from making too much noise, and are expected to pick up all their trash, leaving the area in better condition than it was found. And with this freedom to roam, nature isn't really treated like a museum piece, something that should be experienced from afar or behind a barbed wire fence. Instead, it becomes something to be deeply immersed in, a multisensory, tangible experience whose smells, sounds, sights can have a profound effect upon the minds of their beholders. And there's a long-term effect too. Nature is no longer relegated to occasional visits, but instead becomes a part of people's everyday routine, woven into their lives, helping to relieve stress and promoting mental and physical health. But what I think is so fascinating about many countries' right to roam laws is that in some of these countries, it wasn't even a law in the first place. Fundamentally, the right to roam arises from the principle of nulla poena sine lege, which means what is not illegal cannot be punished. Things that are not explicit.
You know what? I like that. It's like, hey, listen. Nobody told me I can't do this, so I'm gonna just. Basically, you're just asking forgiveness, not permission.
Disallowed are allowed by default. That's why today the right to roam has survived in perhaps its purest form in Estonia, Finland, Iceland, Norway, and Sweden. But the freedom to roam didn't always exist, and in some countries, it's a freedom that many are still fighting for. Take England, for example. Almost a third of England's land is still owned by the aristocracy, and 1 in 8 UK households don't even have access to a garden.
That's crazy.
A statistic that rises to 1 in 5 in London. And many of these aristocratic estates are the product of a 1,000-year history of enclosure, the theft of land that had been previously held in common. Entire villages were forcibly evicted so that land could be subsumed into large estates and adapted for agricultural use and private profit. So that's why in April of 1932, hundreds of ramblers from Manchester and Sheffield set off for the highest points in the peaks. They were intending to highlight the gross unfairness of the severely limited rights to access
Can we say, though, that is really pretty, land they're showing.
Outstandingly beautiful area of country which was rarely farmed by its wealthy aristocratic owner, but instead kept only for occasional hunting and game shooting. The walk would go down in history as the Kinder Scout mass trespass of 1932, named after the Moorland Plateau, and would later be seen as a seminal moment in the struggle for public access to private land. And even outside of England, there are still major landowners in Norway, counts in Sweden, lords in Scotland who own many hundreds of thousands of acres. But the difference in these countries is that their ownership of the land, however, while it does allow them to take rent, mine, and make money from the land, it does not include the right to exclude every other member of the public. In these countries, the right to roam is so fundamentally ingrained in the health and well-being of the nation that the right to roam supersedes any exclusionary tendencies of private property law. Instead, every person has the right to explore these vast open spaces, in some cases, even to sleep there, to kayak, swim, climb, ride horses, and cycle. In 2000, England did pass the Countryside and Rights of Way, or the Crow Act, which gave a partial right to roam over about 8% of England. For the last 2 decades, they have had legal access to walk over certain landscapes, mountain moor commons, and some downland and coastlines, without the fear of trespassing. But these sites are often remote, meaning that access to land has become a postcode lottery, available to those who live next to it, or who can afford the cost of travel and overnight stays. But here in Germany, the right to roam is more robust than what currently exists in England, but is quite a bit more limited than what you see in Northern Europe. Because here in Germany, the right to roam, also known as Betretungsrecht, is guaranteed by multiple federal laws, most notably the Federal Nature Conservation Act, the Federal Forest Act, and the Federal Water Management Act, that collectively allow everyone access to the open landscape, uncultivated land, forests, and bodies of water, including cycling and horse riding on tracks and paths. However, unlike Northern Europe, free camping is strictly forbidden in Germany. But that being said, the Constitution of Bavaria guarantees everyone the right of enjoyment of natural beauty and recreation in the outdoors, in particular the access to forests and mountain meadows, the use of waterways and lakes, and the appropriation of wild fruits and edibles. That right is actually nicknamed Schwammerparagraph, or the Mushroom Clause, but the article also obliges every person to treat nature and the landscape with care. And I think that's really a major point, because at its core, the right to roam is about both equality and environmentalism. Two things that, well, frankly, haven't always been so easy to come by in the United States.
Fair.
The right to roam
That's
assures that outdoor recreational activities are permitted wherever they are not explicitly implied.
I feel like I gotta say, sorry I'm not like talking too much and like being like an entertaining reaction. I'm just like listening because it's interesting, because it's like, I'm not gonna lie, here's the thing is, I've never thought of this, so I'm like looking at this and I'm trying to challenge my point of view in my head, but it's like, I'm still just thinking like, why... I'm thinking at it more from a landowner's perspective. So like, I'd be interested to hear from anyone who does own like a lot of land in these countries. How do you guys feel about it? Because like, I'm thinking this because I have a goal to one day own as much land as possible, just so I can like not be bothered and have a bunch of cool animals and just be like on my own, I guess. Like, I don't know about like fully off the grid, but like, you know, not deal with the issues of neighbors and random people and traffic and just all the headaches that come from living around humans, people. And like, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking like, whenever I achieve this goal, I wouldn't want just a bunch of random people having the right to be on my property and nothing I can do about it. Like, to me, in my head, in the way I grew up and the culture I grew up in, it just don't, like, it don't compute. I don't see how that's a good thing for me. But like, I can see how I'm putting me in, i.e. the property owner, right? So like, that's how I'm looking at it. But then I'm also looking at it and I can see the other side of it, where I can see how, hey, if people were able to explore nature more, I can see how, hey, maybe people would be less apt to fuck with shit. Or maybe people would be just more respectful of the environment we're in. So that's kind of why. But then it's like, I don't trust people out here to like respect properties. Like, that's another thing. It's like, personally, if I had this land, I wouldn't trust people to respect my land. Like, is that an issue out there? Like, that's another question I want to know. Is that like something you guys largely deal with out there? Do you have a lot of people who are disrespectful, or is generally everybody quite respectful? Because I feel like you guys are more respectful of each other out there than we are here.
always been so easy to come by in the United States. The right to roam assures that outdoor recreational activities are permitted wherever they are not explicitly implied. But in the United States, the opposite holds true. And that's something that I find somewhat surprising given just how vast and also how young the United States is as a nation. After all, the American story is one of the Wild West, exploration and adventure. And perhaps no single story in our entire history is more emboldened by this uncharted frontier than the frontiersmen and women themselves. The American prairie was a vast and uncharted expanse of tall, tough grasses and land suitable for nomads, not settlers. It had long been the territory of the Native Americans, and the prairie was an unbounded space, more like an ocean than a stretch of arable land. But after the passage of the Homestead Act of 1862, those looking to stake a claim for themselves pushed west. The cowboys roamed free, herding cattle over the boundless plains. But those settlers needed fences, not least to keep those free-roaming cattle from trampling their crops. And there wasn't a lot of wood, certainly none to spare for fencing, in mile after mile of what was often called the American desert. Farmers tried growing thorn bush hedges, but they were slow-growing and inflexible. Smooth wire fences didn't work either, as the cattle simply pushed through them. So for much of the early American West...
Little cut here because my headphones died on me, so I had to charge these up, so
certainly none to spare for
so I can get
fencing,
back into
in
it.
mile after mile of what was often called the American desert. Farmers tried growing thorn bush hedges, but they were slow-growing and inflexible. Smooth wire fences didn't work either, as the cattle simply pushed through them. So for much of the early American West, private ownership of land wasn't really all that common because it really wasn't all that feasible. But then along came barbed wire, and it changed what the Homestead Act could not. The homesteading farmers were trying to stake out their property that had once been the territory of various Native American tribes. No wonder these tribes called barbed wire the devil's rope. The old-time cowboys also lived on the principle that cattle could graze freely across the plains. This was the law of the open range, and the cowboys hated the wire. Cattle would get nasty wounds and infections, and when the blizzards came, the cattle would try to head south, and sometimes they got stuck against the wire and died in the thousands. However,
That's crazy. I never knew about that. That's insane. Like, wow. That's...
wounds and infections, and when the blizzards came, the cattle would try to head south, and sometimes they got stuck against the wire and died in the thousands. However, other cowmen did adopt barbed wire, using it to fence off huge private ranches. And while barbed wire could enforce legal boundaries, many fences were actually illegal, attempts to commandeer common land for private purposes. But it's certainly true that modern economies are built on the legal fact that most things, including land and property, have an owner, usually a person or a corporation. And the ability to own private property also gives people an incentive to invest in and improve what they own, whether that's a patch of land in the American Midwest or an apartment in New York City. And it's a powerful argument. It was ruthlessly and cynically deployed by those who wanted to argue that, hey, Native Americans didn't really have a right to their own territory because they weren't actively developing it in a style that the Europeans saw fit. So the story how barbed wire...
And that is an interesting concept. Like, how we just show up, be like, yeah, bitch, this ours now. And y'all, nope, y'all don't got nothing. Screw all of y'all. Y'all wasn't using the land right, so fuck y'all. Like, it is a crazy concept to think of how, like, I'm making like little jokes about it, but honestly, it's not even something really to joke about. It's just kind of crazy.
Changed the West is also very much a story of how property rights have transformed the modern world. I mean, absolutely. The Homestead Act very much laid out who owned what in the new Western territories. But those laws couldn't really be enforced until fences entered into the conversation. And so today, Americans still live with a pretty rigid definition and delineation of what is mine versus yours.
Yeah,
Quite literally.
true.
We preach the notion that good fences make good neighbors, and
Honestly, though, I agree with that. Like, the one time, listen, I've gotten along with, like, neighbors throughout my life, for most of my life. Neighbors throughout my life, for most of my life. I don't think that made sense. Okay. Anyway, ignoring my failure to speak English, I've gotten along with, my neighbors well, for most places I've lived in. I've lived in a lot of places. The one time I didn't get along well with neighbors was when I had a shitty fence and my asshole dogs decided to get loose. And, yeah, there's a lot of stories to tell there that we won't get into. But, needless to say, the second we got a good fence, we had better neighbors. Because, honestly, we were just shitty neighbors. Honestly, it's our fault. I can't even blame the neighbors.
resultingly, the majority of the US landscape is unknown to the general public because, by law of trespass, we're banned from setting foot on it in the first place. We're excluded from millions of acres of open space, woodland, meadows, rivers, and their banks, simply because existing laws of ownership prioritize private property rights and not the accessibility of nature to the public.
But let me ask this, right? What gives people the right? So, like, again, I'm putting myself in the property owner's shoes here, right? Because I'm looking at this as somebody who plans to own a large property in the future should, things in my life go to plan, right? What gives somebody the right to land that I worked my ass off to get in this hypothetical situation, right? I don't feel like people should have a right to just walk onto my land and disrespect my land and come around my home when I don't know them. I'm out in, if things go how I like, at the middle of nowhere. Nobody's gonna be out there, like, excuse me. But, like, I don't see how they have a right to it. Even though I can, on the other hand, I can understand the concept of if you show people, like, look at Yellowstone, for example, right? Look at all the Everglades. Look at these places where, people are allowed to wander and explore. I can understand the concept of show people nature so they can learn to appreciate it and then hence maybe respect it more. So it's like, I can see both sides of the argument where I'm looking at this and, like, future me, where my fear would be is, how can I, one, trust people to respect my land, my property, whatever I have on my property, animals and whatever else, right? Toys of other sorts, fun things to ride around on that go vroom vroom. Dirt bikes and all that. And it's like, how can you, like, I guess I don't have the trust in people for, if I had a large plot of land, to just be okay with people coming on. Like, and then it also goes back to my other concern, where it's like, throughout my life I've always had guard dogs. That's not gonna change. Like, what happens if somebody's on your land and intrude on your house or whatever, and you have your dog out there and the dog decides to not be friends? Like, how does that work when people technically have a right to be on your property?
Today in the United States, roughly 60% of land is privately owned, either by individuals or corporations. The remaining 40% is owned by federal, state, or local government.
That's insane. That is insane. 2.2 million acres. 2 million. That's crazy. I'm not gonna lie. This is excessive. I don't see how anyone. Is this one property though, or is this like different properties? Like, are these like big investors, or are these people like who just own a bunch of different ranches, or is this like one giant place? Because if that's just one giant place, that's insane.
Governments. The majority of those public lands are administered by the United States Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management, whose agencies of the federal government include about 640 million acres of land, about 28% of the total land area of 2.27 billion acres. Any person, including non-citizens, can legally access and recreate on these lands lawfully, sometimes referred to as the North American model of land conservation.
Also, if we go back here, I'm going to go back to this map that they were showing.
Accessibility of nature to the public, nature to property rights, and not the accessibility of nature to the public. Today in the United States, roughly...
So, you notice how on this half of the U.S., you see a bunch of public land, and you see a little bit here, you know, you got the Everglades here, you got Yellowstone, all that up here. Like, little bit every once in a while around here. I feel like what a good middle ground would be is we need, like, you know, the public land management places buy parts of nature in different states and different, you know, nature, so you can see all the different ecosystems we have in those areas without intruding on public. Like, I feel like that could be a good middle ground, so that way, you know, landowners still have their land, they still have the right to keep people off their land, because to me that's like the biggest reason to get a bunch of land, is so you don't have to deal with all the issues and craziness of humanity, right? Like, you can kind of be on your own when you want to and go out and deal with people when you want to. Like, I can see that's at least to me, that's the biggest reason why I'd want to. So why not have that as a middle ground where the government could most definitely afford to buy plots of land. You know, there's people with how many millions of acres? I'm sure they can give up some land. I'm sure they can buy people out of land. You know, I'm sure there are people who are willing to sell land for this cause. Positive of it.
60% of land is privately owned, either by individuals or corporations. From accessing public lands altogether. Restrictive covenances on those public lands, whether it's through loitering or redlining. Government include about 640 million acres of land, about 28% of the total land area of 2.27 billion acres. Any person, including non-citizens, can legally access and recreate on these lands lawfully, sometimes referred to as the North American model of land conservation. But some cities and local...
I guess the problem is I wouldn't trust the government to say do things fairly, which just comes down to the lack of trust myself and a lot of other Americans have in the government. Is I don't trust the government to not, like, BS people out of their land to do that. But in my hypothetical situation where the government doesn't BS people out of their land, that could be a really, really good idea, I think. Feel free to nitpick it in the comments. Like, I'm willing to listen to you guys' opinions.
Governments put more restrictive covenances on those public lands, whether it's through loitering or redlining or outright banning certain groups of individuals from accessing public lands altogether. In St. Louis, Missouri, for example, the government banishes many unhoused people and other vulnerable populations from large areas of the city. These are areas that include public land, and many of the organizations that provide shelter, meals, and care to St. Louis's homeless population. Those who violate the orders have been jailed for months. And just like it was in the early days of the American front...
See, that's crazy to me. Like, to me, that's crazy. Not letting people, like, anyone explore public land. Like, I don't support that. Like, I feel like if it's public land, anybody has the right to be there.
Here, in the United States, knowing who owns what land is incredibly important, because land ownership affects how wealth is distributed nationally, as well as how land is used. Access to land is deeply biased against large sections of our society. 200 years ago, the working class were still intrinsically connected to the countryside. Even as late as the 1930s, rambling and cycling were seen as primarily working class hobbies, accompanied by a strong understanding that nature was needed to counteract the hard, cramped lifestyles of urban dwelling. Only very recently has the countryside become the preserve of the middle and upper classes. From country club memberships to outdoor recreation shops, the leisure industry dominates our access to the countryside. Now even the experience of nature has become something you can purchase, a commodity for those who can afford it. And I'm not just talking about hiking paths or horseback riding trails. Half of the population of the US lives within 50 miles of the coast, but 70% of coastal land is privately owned, and the percentage is increasing all the time. And fences, boundaries, and private property laws manifest a number of tensions between exclusionary aspirations rooted in fear and protection of privilege and the values of civic responsibility, between the trend towards privatization of public services and the ideals of public good and general welfare, and between the need for personal and community control of the environment and the perceived dangers of making outsiders of fellow citizens. So in the absence of right to roam laws, the United States has kind of swung wildly in the opposite direction, with increasingly deadly consequences.
65-year-old man in upstate New York is facing murder charges after he allegedly shot and killed a woman who authorities say accidentally turned into his driveway. Kevin Monahan.
Because in most states,
See, that's one thing I don't understand why. Like, first of all, I have no issue with shooting somebody who comes on your property within reason. Like, if you come on my property and you're trying to get in my house, I can't promise you'll leave in the same condition that you came in. Like, and I will have no remorse. Between myself and the dogs, like, you're gonna have a very bad day. But, like, then there's stuff like this where obviously this is an extreme, right? But it happens, and it's like, I don't get how you're gonna shoot somebody just for pulling into a driveway, right? Now, if she was pulling into but then it's the concept too. Is this in the suburbs or is this in the middle of nowhere, right? If you're in the middle of nowhere, I can see where there's more tension. If you're in the fucking burbs and there's houses all around you and somebody pulls into my driveway, I'm not gonna make a big deal out of it. I live in a town. It happens. But then if you're living in, I don't know, 100 acres of land and someone's pulling up to your house who you don't know, okay, I might be a little more apt to have some firepower with me if you're picking up what I'm putting down. Not saying I'm gonna immediately, but like, yeah, I'm gonna have it on me. I'm gonna be prepared just in case. Why wouldn't you be?
Property line, not the entrance of the home, is the boundary for trespassing, and trespassing is considered a criminal offense. In the US, you are allowed to use physical force against a trespasser if you reasonably believe that it is necessary to prevent criminal interference with your property. And in 45 states with castle doctrine laws, you can actually use deadly force if you reasonably believe that it is necessary to protect yourself or someone else from the imminent use of deadly physical force or to prevent the commission of a dangerous felony such as arson or burglary.
And I'm probably gonna piss a lot of people off, but I support that. Like, if you are stupid enough to break into someone's home and take their hard-earned things, then you're putting your life on the line and you get what you get. And a lot of people aren't gonna like that, and you don't have to agree with me, right? But that's just how I feel. Like, you don't have... What gives you the right to come into my home and take my stuff, but yet you say I shouldn't be allowed to defend it? Like, that's ridiculous to me. And people are gonna be like, oh, you're materialistic. Maybe, but like, I don't care. Like, you don't get to take people's shit and not have consequences come back at you. And if that's fatal consequences, you made your bed lying it. That's why you don't break into people's houses.
Now, I should give a giant disclaimer here. The use of deadly force has to be appropriate, justifiable, and proportional to the threat. And I get that that can be somewhat open to interpretation, but legally speaking, it has to be justifiable.
Yes.
Get off my lawn.
So despite what Hollywood movies and signs like this might lead you to believe, it is in fact entirely illegal to set up a booby trap on your property that could injure or kill trespassers.
You guys give up, or you're thirsty for...
Well, that also varies state to state too. Some states are more lenient about things than others, but overall, she is correct.
more.
And in fact, the courts have actually upheld rulings that even make firing a warning shot illegal. Since
See, I don't get that. Like, okay, let's pretend you're a trespasser. You're going on someone's property who doesn't want you there. Wouldn't you rather have a warning shot than a shot for you? Like, I don't know. Me personally, I'd rather hear that warning shot and get lost than end up meeting that person. And
this still amounts to lethal force beyond what is reasonably necessary. But this fear that you could be injured or even killed for walking onto a property when you're not really sure who it belongs to is so pervasive in the American psyche that speaking from personal experience, it's definitely kept me from walking in an open field because I really wasn't sure who it belonged to. And this fear...
That she is right about that too. And also, let me say, you guys are all more than welcome to challenge me on these things, because I find your guys' takes on things very interesting. And so genuinely challenge me on these things. Talk to me about these things. Tell me why you may or may not agree with whatever. Like, I am here for the conversations. But, like, to me, I don't see anything wrong with the concept of somebody works hard to buy land, or they're using this land to live on for their livelihood, of not wanting people on it and wanting to defend that land if need be.
Fear isn't unfounded. It's worth mentioning that some states, in order to quell this fear, have passed laws that do provide for some limited forms of public access to private lands. For example, in some western states, such as Montana and Colorado, people can access certain types of public lands, such as rivers and streams, by crossing private lands without trespassing. Other states, such as Maine and Vermont, have passed right to roam laws that allow people to access certain types of private lands, such as coastal areas and abandoned railroad beds for recreational purposes. However, these laws are often incredibly unclear, and they vary significantly from one municipality to the next. And so this fear of not being able to really fully enjoy all of the outdoors, especially even the great outdoors, it's just so vastly different from what happens right here in Europe. All right, guys, so it's...
Also, let me say this. I understand what she's saying, and I can actually see the other side of where I may come from as somebody who is, wanting to get these large plots of land for the privacy that it offers, right? So that's why I may come at this from a different perspective, because I'm somebody who hopes to be a future landowner of a decent chunk of land, and when I get this land, really don't want people wandering onto my space, if that makes sense. So, I can see her side of view, though. Or say even what I'm guessing a lot of your guys' sides of view are, of exploring the country and, getting to see the beauty of the land, and I can see how that is nice. But then I'm kind of hoping y'all can see a little bit of my perspective of people work hard to get this land. People work hard to earn this land. People make a living off this land. It's their livelihood. They put, all their money into this land. They put all their time into this land. They don't want random people showing up and ruining their land or wandering their land and having the opposing risks of what happens if people get hurt on your land. Can they be sued? Can you be sued by them? How does it all work? There's a lot of, which I feel like is another thing where in other countries, y'all don't have the issue of people always trying to sue everybody like out here. Like, there's a lot of variables that come in for that to be a thing here. So I'm kind of interested in what you guys see, and hey, maybe we find a middle ground. Maybe you guys change my mind on things a little bit. You never know. I mean, you guys have done it before. I'm sure y'all do it again. So, yeah.
It's time for my final question of the video, and it's a big one. Proponents of the right to roam argue that it promotes physical activity, environmental stewardship, and mental health by encouraging people to spend more time outdoors.
I can honestly see that logic, which is why I feel like the government should have more public land that people can get to and can explore, so we can have all these advantages.
Also claim that it is a democratic right that allows everyone, regardless of their socioeconomic status, to access and enjoy public lands. In addition, they argue that the right to roam can have positive economic effects by stimulating outdoor recreation and tourism. However, opponents argue that it undermines private property rights, reduces landowners' incentives to maintain their properties, and can lead to trespassing, vandalism, and littering.
I'd also agree with that. I feel like this is one of those situations where both sides are kind of right, if that makes sense. I'm more apt to support the, idea of people keeping the right to have others off their private land, or, it being due to the owner of the land, whether people have the right to roam on their land or not. So I favor that side more due to my personal future plans of having property and not wanting strangers on my property. But let me be clear when I say I can see the other side, and the other side also makes valid points.
They also claim that it can pose a threat to public safety by exposing people to dangerous terrain or wild animals.
Very true. That's a very true thing, but I feel like you could say the same in Yellowstone. You could say the same on public land as well. That don't just change. But I guess where my question would be is, on private land, would more responsibility then fall on the landowner? Is in your country, so is the landowner responsible for the safety of people traveling through their land? Can the landowner get, say, in trouble if somebody was to be injured on their land? How does all that work?
So what are your thoughts on the right to roam? Do good fences make good neighbors? Or is access to the outdoors a fundamental human right?
All right, well, after hearing this, I feel like y'all know my opinion, but let's break it down. I do think it is a good thing. I can see the beauty in it, and I think that we in the US of A should find some form of a middle ground, i.e. we need more Yellowstones, more throughout the country, right? You see how on that map back earlier on in the video, you see how different sides of the US, they have a lot more public land for people to explore, so that way they get the right to roam without intruding on the private property owner's land. And I think we need more of that. So we have the places for people to roam and explore nature and, see what it's like, but then it also still keeps the privacy that a lot of people get all this land for intact, and you know, the concerns of private homeowners intact, so that way everybody wins. That's my take on it. I feel like there's a middle ground that could be achieved, and I feel like that's what we gotta work for. Either way, I want to hear, what's your guys' take on it? What's your guys' take on what I've said throughout the video? I feel like there are going to be some things that people are going to get mad at me for. And if you do get mad at me, I mean, hey, listen, I respect your opinion, respect mine. But let's hear it. Let's see her opinion on it.
Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section
I
below.
want to see if she says that too.
And as always, if you enjoyed what you saw today, be sure to hit that thumbs up button. And for more content from the Black Forest family, hit that subscribe button. So, I'll see you next Sunday. Cheers!
Well, I guess she's not going to give her opinion on it, even though I feel like her opinion, just from this video, probably favors the more European point of view. But hey, give me a fat ass like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, click all. Y'all know how YouTube works. And I really want to hear your guys' opinions on this. I feel like I really hope this video does well. Like, I hope all the videos do well, but this one especially, because I really want to like go through these comments. So like, I will be going, even if this video is older, I'll probably still occasionally go through these comments, because I feel like I'm gonna hear some very interesting takes on this one. Either way, I'm out. Bye. With